He thought I'd flinch, beg, fold like others had. But when I asked about the language of the contract, his smirk faltered. In rooms where paper speaks louder than blood, precision is power, and I never bluff. The boardroom smelled of cold espresso and fresh resentment. I stood at the long mahogany table, my notes aligned like soldiers before battle, while across from me, in the seat that had once belonged to my late brother, sat his son, my nephew, clad in tailored arrogance. He had requested the meeting formally, not via email, not through the family group chat. He sent a printed memo, signed in black ink, dropped at my desk by his secretary. The kind of message that didn't ask. It declared. I arrived 5 minutes early. He walked in 10 minutes late. "Sign this," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Or you're out." No good morning, no explanation, just those 4 words delivered in a tone colder than the marble floor. I didn't flinch. I simply raised an eyebrow, studying him the way a lawyer might study a hostile witness. "In which language?" I asked, almost lightly. "English or French?" His lips twitched, half smirk, half surprise. A small tell, but it cracked the facade. The contract between us might have been bloodline, but the paper in front of me spoke another language. Literally. That mattered. I opened the folder, careful not to touch the signature page. The paragraphs were clean, the layout professional, except Article 4.2, langue de référence, wasn't in English. My fingers paused. It wasn't a translation mistake. It was deliberate. "Is this a new draft?" I asked, thumbing through the pages like I had all the time in the world. "Because the last version was in English. This one's in French." He shrugged. "Just sign. Legals cleared it." There it was, the second tell, the deflection, no mention of which legal counsel had reviewed it. And when someone avoids names, it usually means they're hiding one, or hiding that no one reviewed it at all. I didn't speak. I closed the folder slowly and looked at him, really looked. His tie was expensive, but knotted hastily. His hands were clean, but the skin around his knuckles was raw. He'd been clenching fists recently. Guilt? Stress? Or anticipation? "Nephew," I said, using the title like a blade. "I'll sign nothing until my own legal counsel looks it over." That word, legal counsel, hung between us like a slap. He didn't respond, just stared, blank, as if unsure whether to fight or flee. The silence was golden. For once, I had it on my side. By the time I returned to my office, I already had a call lined up. Charles B. Duval, our longtime family attorney, had retired 2 years ago, but his daughter Clarice had taken over the firm. And if there was anyone who knew the legal skeletons in our family's closet, it was her. I sent her the scanned document with one line. Language clause. Urgent. Within 15 minutes, her reply came back. "We need to meet. There's a problem." Clarice met me in a downtown cafe that pretended to be casual but whispered confidentiality in every detail. Sound-absorbing walls, polished concrete, and waiters who didn't ask questions. She was already seated when I arrived, her laptop open, reading glasses perched low on her nose, a coffee untouched. "I didn't bring my father's name into this lightly," she said, skipping formalities. "But if he saw this contract, he'd throw a paperweight through the window." I sat down, slid the folder toward her, and waited. "The signature line's in English," she continued, tapping with her pen. "But the governing language clause, here, Article 4.2, states the original language of interpretation is French. That means if there's any conflict between the English and French versions, the French one prevails. And that matters because..." Clarice didn't blink. "Because there's no English version attached." The room spun, just slightly, but I kept my expression still. "So they gave me a contract in English, but the clause that governs interpretation says French. And they never supplied the French original?" She nodded, "which means what you sign may not be what's enforced." I looked out the window. A city bus hissed past, passengers packed inside like forgotten thoughts. It wasn't about language, it was about trapdoors, the kind people like my nephew were now learning to install. "This is corporate sleight of hand," she added. "Legal sabotage, dressed in polite paper. Can I call it invalid? Better. You can prove intent to deceive, especially if we find out who drafted it." Another small twist of the knife. Not only had he tried to corner me with a fraudulent signature, he'd done it in a way that counted on me not noticing. That hurt more than the betrayal itself. He thought he could slide it past me, I said softly. Clarice leaned in. Your nephew is trying to change control of the holding company. If this contract gets enforced, you're removed from the board entirely, retroactively. You'll lose your veto rights. So that was it. The stakes weren't symbolic. They were surgical. My position wasn't just ceremonial. It had teeth, and he wanted them gone. Send me a copy of their communication chain, she added. Any emails, texts, calendar invites, especially anything referencing language clause, signature requirements, or external legal advisors. I pulled out my phone and began forwarding everything. Every Zoom invite, every FYI email from his assistant, every smug calendar request titled Succession Review. Clarice scrolled rapidly. Then she stopped. Her brow furrowed. What? I asked. This. She turned the screen toward me. It was an internal memo I hadn't even remembered receiving. The subject line read, Contract Draft. Final Review, en attente de validation, sent from a French-based law firm. This firm, she said, pointing, they're not even licensed in this jurisdiction. If he used them to draft the French original and failed to file a dual-language version with your legal department, he's already violated 3 internal policies. 3 strikes, all hidden in plain sight. So what now? Clarice smiled, just barely. We don't confront. We verify, quietly. We request the French original, citing policy compliance. If they can't produce it, or if it differs from what you were told, you hold the pen. But he holds the liability. The game had changed. No shouting, no lawyers storming into boardrooms, just paperwork. And patience. If you've ever been pressured to sign something you didn't fully understand, tell your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else spot the trap. The next morning, the office was unusually quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, like early January when everyone's still pretending to care about work-life balance. No, this was a glassy, artificial stillness. The kind that leaks from behind closed doors, where meetings stretch too long and voices lower just enough to make everyone lean closer. My nephew's door was shut. His assistant, usually a hummingbird of nervous energy, didn't even offer her signature tight-lipped smile when I passed. Her eyes darted from screen to hallway and back, typing with unnecessary urgency, like someone trying to look busy during a fire drill. I walked straight past, calm and unhurried. My destination wasn't his office, it was HR. People underestimate human resources. They think it's all birthday cards and Excel charts. But HR sees everything. Every promotion, every demotion, every signed document, and shadowy whisper that gets turned into a policy update. If you want to understand who's really pulling strings, follow the access logs. Clarice had texted me one phrase that morning. Check internal access. Who uploaded the French draft? So here I was, smiling, polite, surgical. Rosa, I greeted the HR manager. Just need a quick peek into the document management system. There's been a versioning issue with the succession paperwork. Rosa blinked. She was sharp, mid-50s, the kind of woman who didn't tolerate noise or nonsense. We had mutual respect, mainly because I never underestimated her. You mean the language discrepancy? She asked, already swiveling her monitor toward me, so it had spread. Exactly what I wanted. Correct, I said. Just need the upload logs for the French version. She clicked efficiently. Within seconds, the audit trail bloomed on screen. Timestamps, usernames, IP addresses. My nephew's assistant had uploaded a folder labeled Draft Final FR 2 days before our meeting using her personal laptop. Violation NAR1, unauthorized device access to sensitive legal material. Violation NAR2, no duplicate version uploaded to legal archives. Violation number 3, no signature verification log attached. I didn't need to say a word. Rosa leaned back and exhaled through her nose. Why do they think this stuff disappears? She muttered, more to herself than to me. It's like nobody's read the policy manual since 2012. I smiled politely, but my pulse quickened. Every detail was falling into place. This wasn't just sloppy, it was traceable. Mind sending a copy of the log to Clarice Duval's office? I asked. She's handling compliance. Rosa nodded. Already done. I stepped out of HR and into the hallway. The air felt warmer. Not because I was winning, but because for the first time in days I was seen. Not as the soft-spoken aunt on the board. Not as the family relic clinging to her seat, but as someone with teeth. My phone buzzed. It was a new email from Clarice. Subject: Legal confirmation, invalid signature. Body: As discussed, the signature on the English version holds no legal weight under current language clause. Enforcement impossible. More soon. I reread the message, then once more. And in the corner of my eye, I caught the reflection of my nephew stepping out of his office, phone pressed to his ear, forehead furrowed, speaking French into the receiver with the urgency of someone whose plan was dissolving too fast to fix. He glanced at me. I didn't blink. The board meeting was set for Friday. Noon, room 7C. That room had seen it all. Mergers, resignations, tantrums. A chairman once crying softly behind mirrored glasses when his golden parachute got tangled in a non-disclosure clause. I knew because I'd been in that chair once, years ago. Now I sat 3 seats down, technically non-executive, though I never quite behaved like it. That Friday, I dressed like I meant business, not aggressive, just exact. Neutral-toned silk blouse, pearl earrings, the sharp charcoal blazer I reserved for days when memory needed to look like a legacy. No perfume, but I wore the scent of preparation, the kind that makes a room hush when you enter. The moment I stepped into 7C, I knew the agenda had changed. The nephew was already there, of course, pretending calm. Legal counsel flanked him, some slick new hire I didn't recognize, adjusting his cuffs like they were credentials. No sign of Clarice yet. I took my seat slowly. No need to rush. When someone's built a sandcastle during high tide, you let the waves do their work. We'll begin shortly, the CEO said, a little too stiffly. His tie was crooked. That was new. 2 chairs down, the legal counsel cleared his throat and pushed a slim folder toward me. Before we begin, he said, we'd like to clarify a documentation matter related to the succession contract. And there it was. The trap uncoiling in real time. I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the contract I'd been pressured to sign. Same typeface, same paper, same signature line, with my name printed in neat clinical font. But this time, the clause about language, gone. No langue de référence, no Article 4.2, no mention of a French original. I looked up slowly. I see, I said. This is the final version, the legal counsel replied quickly. We've confirmed it. Curious, I said, tapping the page lightly, because the one I received said otherwise, and HR confirmed the audit trail. Your assistant uploaded a version 2 days prior with a French language clause still embedded. The room shifted. Eyes flicked toward the nephew, his jaw flexed. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at legal, like someone suddenly questioning his insurance coverage. And that version, I continued, sliding my own printout from my bag, was reviewed by our external legal counsel, Clarice Duval. Her statement confirms that without the original French document attached, the signature on the English version is non-binding under the policies filed in 2019. The CEO shifted in his seat. One of the board members coughed. Clarice entered the room at that exact moment, as if summoned by tension. She placed a small folder on the table, unlabeled, plain, dangerous. I've filed an official memorandum, she said calmly, outlining the inconsistencies in versioning, the unauthorized upload via non-secure device, and the failure to provide bilingual copies as required by Policy 12.4. I've also noted the absence of a signed approval chain. No drama, no threats, just facts. The nephew opened his mouth, but found no words. The legal counsel beside him swallowed hard. We weren't aware of the policy updates. Then you shouldn't draft contracts in this company, Clarice cut in smoothly, let alone enforce them. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The papers were speaking now. And unlike people, papers didn't backpedal. You'd think the fallout would be immediate, that someone would slam a folder shut, that the CEO would clear his throat and declare the contract void, that my nephew, pale and cornered, would storm out in frustration. But real corporate unravelings don't come with fireworks. They come with minutes. Long, uncomfortable minutes, silence stretching like a rubber band across a room of well-dressed people pretending to be above consequence. The board meeting resumed after Clarissa's memo landed on the table, but everything had changed. The language clause, once buried deep in the fine print, now sat in everyone's mind like a splinter they couldn't ignore. Every new motion, every vote was suddenly coated with a thin layer of caution. The nephew didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. He listened, nodded, took notes he wouldn't use. His confidence, once swaggering, had hollowed into posture. His eyes avoided mine, but his fingers tapped restlessly on the table, counting something. Minutes, mistakes, maybe both. After the meeting, the CEO called me aside. "Did you plan this?" he asked, not with malice, but with that peculiar blend of awe and anxiety men get when they realize the quietest person in the room was never unarmed. I tilted my head. "Would it matter if I did?" He half laughed, then stopped himself. "We'll need to conduct an internal review. He's still family, but you understand." I nodded. I understood too well. Family and business is like sugar and gas, sweet but ruinous. Later that afternoon, I received a calendar invite. Subject: language. Policy audit, external and internal oversight location. Legal debt, room 5B organizer, Clarice Duval. Attendees: you, HR director, compliance officer, legal rep. The kind of meeting that doesn't just fix the past, it rewrites the future. I arrived early. Clarice was already there, flipping through a binder like a surgeon, prepping for a procedure. Rosa from HR sat beside her, arms folded, jaw locked in that "I've seen everything" expression. We began with documentation. Clarice presented copies of the upload log, chain of custody, signature trail, and email inconsistencies. Every file had a tab. Every paragraph had a footnote. By the time she finished, the table was lined with evidence like a prosecutor's dream. Then came the policies. Policy 9.3, Clarice said, tapping a page, requires dual language contracts in international business units with explicit verification of governing language. "And the French version?" asked the compliance officer. "Never produced," Clarice replied, deadpan. "It likely exists, just not anywhere official, which for us is as good as non-existent." I stayed quiet. Let the silence fill the cracks. "What's your recommendation?" the legal rep asked finally. Clarice didn't miss a beat. "Invalid signature, possible misconduct. Internal disciplinary procedures recommended. External notification optional, depending on how public this attempt was meant to be." Everyone looked at me. I met their eyes, one by one. "No external action," I said clearly. "Let it be a lesson, not a headline." They all nodded. But deep down, we knew what mattered most had already been done. I hadn't needed to yell, to accuse, or to retaliate. All I'd done was read what others had skimmed, and that changed everything. The Monday after the audit, the office atmosphere had shifted, subtly, but undeniably. No one said anything, of course. In companies like ours, gossip wears a suit and whispers behind glass. But people noticed. The nephew, once an aggressive presence with a voice too loud for small rooms, now moved quieter. His shoes didn't click as hard. His shoulders folded in, like someone trying to be smaller than his title. And yet, he still sat in the same corner office, still had his name on the door. That's how corporate consequences often look. Internal bruises, not visible scars. But what he didn't realize? The bruises were spreading. An internal memo went out that afternoon, bland on the surface, but barbed if you knew how to read between the bullet points. Subject: policy alignment and language compliance review. To all department heads, from Office of Compliance. The memo outlined a standardized audit of all legal documentation from the past fiscal year. But the subtext was surgical. It meant, we know, we're looking, don't test us. The most telling part? It referenced the importance of maintaining document integrity across bilingual jurisdictions, citing Policy 9.3 and Section 12.4, the exact rules that had sliced through my nephew's scheme like wire through butter. The trap he'd tried to set had triggered a system-wide awakening. I wasn't in every meeting that followed, but I didn't need to be. The shift echoed in how people greeted me now, with a pause, a second of added eye contact, Not fear, but recalibration. They were recalculating who I was, and that was enough. I received an anonymous email the next morning. No subject line, no body, just a PDF attachment. A scanned document titled Succession Comms Internal FR Draft. The French version. I opened it slowly, each paragraph familiar and yet colder in its original form. The phrasing was sharp, unmistakable, intentional loopholes, buried power shifts, a clause in section 6.1 that outright reversed a board member's voting rights. He had meant to take me out. Not with rage, not with confrontation, with grammar. I forwarded it to Clarisse without comment. 10 minutes later, she responded, "Too late to bury this. Thank you." That afternoon, she requested a closed-door meeting with the ethics committee. It was a formality, but a loud one. And in the hallway, outside the glass room where a younger man was learning just how much weight silence could carry, I stood by the window, watching the city breathe. Below, cars crawled in organized chaos. Office lights flicked on, off, on again. Business as usual. Except now, it was different. Because once the system learns your name, not the one on your ID, but the one you earn in whispers, it doesn't forget. And mine wasn't going anywhere. There's a peculiar quiet that follows a failed coup. Not the dramatic kind with guards and alarms, but the corporate kind, where ambition wears cufflinks and betrayal hides in formatting. That week, the office entered what I call the audit silence. Emails became more polite. CC lines grew longer. People who usually replied with a thumbs-up emoji now wrote full paragraphs with "per my last message" and "please advise." And the nephew? He became a ghost with a badge, still present, but fading. Meanwhile, Clarisse's name began surfacing in more conversations. Subtly at first, then as a reference, a standard. "Let's run that by legal counsel," people said now, with actual respect. Not as a checkbox, but as a shield. Funny how one exposed clause could realign an entire food chain. In the middle of this shift, I got an unexpected visitor. HR Rosa appeared at my door with a neutral face and a manila folder. "No drama," she said with a small smile. "Just a courtesy." She handed me the file. Inside, a revised organizational chart. Notably, one title had moved laterally. Nephew, formerly listed as Acting Director of Strategic Development, was now simply Advisor Special Projects. A title with no teeth, no voting rights, no board access, no succession trail. "He's still salaried," Rosa explained, "but no longer operational." I closed the folder gently. "Who made the decision?" Rosa shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that meant everyone, quietly, together. Policy had spoken. Reputation had enforced it. The same afternoon, I had coffee with the CEO. He looked tired in a human way, not defeated, but aware, like someone who had seen the floor beneath his chair shift an inch and suddenly realized it had always been on wheels. "Did you want this?" he asked me, stirring sugar into his espresso without drinking it. "No," I said truthfully, but I expected it. He nodded, the kind of nod that people give when they're grateful, but still unsure if they should be. "I underestimated you." "You read what you wanted to see," I replied, and so did he. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked something rare. "What do you want next?" And for the first time in a long while, I let myself answer. "Stability," I said, "clarity, and better French translators." He laughed, a real one this time. That night, I walked past my nephew's office. The light was still on, but the door was ajar. Empty. On the desk sat the contract folder, the original one. The signature page lay open, the line with my name left blank, untouched, unmoved. And suddenly I realized that in this whole twisted process, I hadn't just protected my seat. I had proven that silence, precision, and paper could still win against noise. Not because I was ruthless, but because I was ready. The elevator stopped on floor 14, not mine. Clarisse stepped in. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded. That knowing half-gesture people in high-rises give each other when battles have been fought in silence and resolved in footnotes. "You heard?" she asked after a few seconds. "I read," I replied, pulling my phone from my coat pocket. The internal bulletin had gone out just an hour ago. Effective immediately. All succession protocols require bilingual documentation, verified in-house. External legal drafts must be pre-cleared by certified translation partners. I almost smiled. My nephew's gambit hadn't just backfired, it had authored new policy. Clarice glanced sideways. He's requested a leave of absence, unpaid. I raised an eyebrow. Voluntary? On paper, yes. Of course, in companies like ours, you don't get fired. You get options. Options that come wrapped in gold-embossed envelopes and vague phrases like realignment and personal transition planning. But language mattered. Again. And this time, we wrote it. Back at my desk, the air felt lighter. Or maybe I was breathing deeper. My assistant, who had kept her head down throughout the entire affair, appeared at my door with a small smile. "There's someone in the lobby," she said. "Asking to see you. Said he's a translator. Brought documents for review." I blinked. "A translator?" He said, "You'd understand." Curious. Downstairs, I found him in a navy coat, holding a thick folder, eyes sharp but kind. He introduced himself in flawless French, then again in polished English. "I've been retained by legal to do full compliance review," he explained. "They told me to start with the contracts marked legacy sensitive." Legacy sensitive. What a poetic way of saying, the ones that matter. We took the documents into conference room 2A, where the light was never flattering and the chairs always a bit too firm. He laid out several contracts. Some I hadn't seen in years. One had my brother's name on it. Another had mine, barely legible from the early days. But then came one I'd never signed. The French draft. The original. Unedited. Unburied. "This," he said, pointing to a clause I knew by heart, "wasn't just mistranslated, it was manipulated." He handed me a comparison sheet. Side-by-side language differences, subtle word choices that shifted legal intent, just enough to matter. Clarice hadn't been exaggerating. This wasn't just ambition. This was an attempt at linguistic fraud. And yet, none of it had worked. Because even if he'd counted on everyone being too tired, too distracted, too trusting, someone still read it. Me. At the bottom of one page was a note in the margin, likely a comment from an early draft. It read, in French, "She won't check this far." I traced the sentence with my finger, paused, then underlined it. Bold. "Oh," I whispered. But she did. 2 weeks later, the boardroom had new energy. Not louder, not younger, just sharper. The usual power suits still filled the leather chairs, but there was a different kind of attentiveness. Laptops opened earlier. Eyes scanned lines twice, and no one, not even the CEO, skipped the language clause when reviewing agenda items. The paper had changed the people, and the people, in turn, were changing the system. Clarice had been asked to lead a compliance workshop, not the performative kind with slides and bagels, but a closed-door masterclass titled "How to Hear What Paper Really Says." I was invited, but I declined. Not out of pride, out of trust. I didn't need to be in the room anymore for the room to remember. That same afternoon, I found a small envelope on my desk, handwritten, no company seal. Inside, a folded thank you card. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. Nephew. 3 lines, no apology, just clarity. "I thought I could outwrite you. I was wrong. You didn't just read the contract, you read me. No bitterness, no excuses, just surrender." I placed the card in the drawer beside my first promotion letter and my last family Christmas photo in the building. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had tried to use legacy to erase me, and in doing so, he had secured mine. Later that day, Clarice and I shared a walk through the lower floor corridors, where the junior analysts whispered and HR interns passed us with wide eyes. She turned to me. "He won't be back, you know." I nodded. "I don't need him to be," I said. "I was wrong too," she added. "I thought this was just about a contract." But it wasn't. "No," I agreed. "It was about knowing when to speak, and when to let the paper speak for you." We paused at the glass wall that overlooked the city, gray clouds hanging like unsent memos over glass towers. Clarice smiled. "You ever consider running the board?" I raised an eyebrow. "I already do." She laughed. And for the first time in months, so did I. I kept the folder, the one with the original contract, both versions, English and French, annotated, time-stamped, highlighted. It now lived in the bottom drawer of my office cabinet, behind a locked panel labeled innocuously, Archive, Legal, Non-active. I didn't need it anymore, but I wasn't ready to let it go either. Some documents don't expire, not because of their legal weight, but because of what they teach you. This one taught me the most important corporate lesson of all. Loyalty doesn't live in bloodlines. It lives in margins. And margins don't lie. 3 months had passed since the audit. The nephew's name was still on the internal directory, but his inbox bounced back auto-replies. I never asked where he'd gone. I never needed to. He had tried to write me out of the story. Instead, he wrote the chapter that defined me. The office had adjusted in small but meaningful ways. Contracts now came with bilingual footers and third-party certifications. HR revised onboarding to include a language clause briefing. And perhaps most notably, legal counsel now had a permanent seat at the board table, not just as guests, but as guardians. Clarice thrived. And so did the quiet. Because without anyone saying it aloud, people had started to read again. Not just policies, but rooms, silences, the way someone hesitated before speaking or pressed a pen too hard when initialing. The company had regained something it didn't know it lost. Precision. And I stopped correcting people when they called me Madame Shire. It wasn't official, not yet. But the paperwork was already moving in that direction, and everyone knew paperwork never moved without intent. One afternoon, as I prepared for yet another roundtable, a junior associate knocked and peeked into my office. "Sorry to interrupt. Just one question," she said, holding a thick file. "There's a clause I can't quite interpret. It's about jurisdiction, written in both French and English, but the phrasing differs." I smiled. "Bring it here." She sat beside me, wide-eyed, grateful. We read the page together. I pointed out the nuance, the intentional ambiguity, the choice of shall in English versus devra in French. One passive, one binding. She blinked slowly. They meant for it to be confusing. "Yes," I said, "and you caught it." That moment stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like the final handoff. I wasn't just protecting the system anymore. I was passing on the habit of looking deeper. Later that evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun dissolve behind the skyline. In the silence, I pulled out the thank you card again, his handwriting, his 3 sentences. And finally, I did what I'd delayed for months. I picked up a pen and signed it, not as a reply, as a record. One last stroke of ink, one final sentence in a story they almost wrote without me.